Welcome back to Across the Pond. This is our last episode for 2019. Hello, Barry.
Hey, Chad, what's up? Let's play that last jingle for the year.
Absolutely.
Pond, across the pond with Barry and Chad.
So how excited are you for the new year, Barry?
I absolutely can't wait. To be honest, for me, this year has been really rough, and so I'm very excited to be done with it. I've learned a hell of a lot in 2019, but it's time to look forward to 2020. A brand new decade, a brand new year, and I'm keen to get started. How are you feeling about it, Chad?
Absolutely. I'm feeling absolutely in the exact same boat. And if this is the worst condition that I could be to close out the year, I actually think that's it. I've got one of the worst cases of man flu I've ever had in my life. For those of you who have had this condition before, the man flu, a very serious one. Just not feeling the best. But certainly looking forward to curing up and starting fresh again in the new year. So very keen for that. So we've got a bit of a different layout for this episode. We're going to be looking through all of the things we've discussed this past year. Obviously, we've only been going for 6 episodes, this being our 7th. So we're still going to stick to the kind of general framework, but it's going to be a bit different. So let's look at the week that was, except it wasn't the week that was. It was kind of the 6 weeks that were.
The week that was.
Barry, you want to start us off on this?
Sure. So I think what's the best way to do is we're going to go through the various episodes we've done, as Chad mentioned, and look at stories that have developed since we first spoke about them. So some of the stories haven't really moved, and so we're going to ignore those. We're only going to look at the ones that have changed in the last couple of weeks to bring you up to speed as to what the latest is at the end of 2019. So the first one is we're going to look at, we spoke about in episode 2, the WeWork situation. And if you remember, we spoke about the company WeWork, which is this giant co-working space all around the world, like a multi-million-dollar company, and really creating a lot of buzz in the industry for when it comes to co-working. And they went through this dramatic turmoil because of lots of drama behind the scenes with the CEO and with various financial irregularities and various skeletons in the closet. And we chatted at that stage about they were looking at potentially firing a whole bunch of employees because of the financial mismanagement and trying to get the company back on track. And what actually ended up happening was they did end up firing up to 2,400 employees, which is a huge, huge number to let go. And as a result, they have been looking to draw cash as much as they can from various other platforms. So by getting rid of those salaries, obviously took a bit of cost off the table. They've also been looking to sell various interests of theirs that are outside of traditional co-working. So as part of their ex-CEO's kind of regime, he liked to invest in various other random investments outside of WeWork specifically, but under the We company. And the company's been looking to sell those outside investments, try and raise some cash to try and focus on the core business itself and get things back on track. So they're currently in the midst of a huge financial restructuring. They're trying to fix all the various holes and the various issues within the company. And the new management team have got a Herculean task ahead of them to try and change the public PR and the public perception about the company around, and in 2020 try and get it back onto a stable footing. So that's kind of the update on WeWork. Chad, you saw a documentary, I believe, on YouTube about WeWork. Do you want to chat about that?
Yeah, I did. So basically just had a little search last night and came across one that Bloomberg's put together. It's about a 13-minute documentary, and they do talk to a couple of things that you're talking about. So as far as I know, some of those investments that he had made were kind of into like the childcare industry. There was, something else. So yeah, definitely saw that on the documentary, and I would definitely recommend going to have a watch of that. It's called The Spectacular Rise and Fall of WeWork, and yeah, basically just some market commentators talking about some things that they've never seen in their time. They make a very interesting comparison to other co-working company or group called IWG. They've obviously got the Regis brand as part of that. And yeah, something really interesting here is that IWG was similar on all the key metrics: square feet, locations, number of members. Yet for some reason, WeWork had a 13 times higher valuation, and it made no sense. They had the CEO they interviewed on as part of this Bloomberg interview, the CEO of IWG, and yeah, he was just kind of wondering, are we missing out on something? Is there something we're not seeing? And yeah, it's just one of those natural, just kind of being brought back down to size.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I must go and check that out. I think that the WeWork has become this almost Harvard business case study, right, to look at as to why this valuation was so high compared to the actual fundamentals of the business. And this is definitely going to be something we look forward to. We look back on in future, looking back at why this happened, what kind of parallels we can draw between those two companies, IWG and WeWork itself, and what this means for tech companies versus real estate companies going forward. So yeah, it's an interesting developing story. We have to keep watching and seeing what happens with WeWork, but at the moment things are still on a pretty much a knife edge, and they are raising as much money as possible to keep themselves alive and pushing forward in 2020.
Cool. So one of the other interesting things that I saw on that documentary was obviously Adam, the CEO, the charismatic CEO we spoke about a couple of weeks ago. After he was basically voted off by the board, there's now co-CEOs, two CEOs that have been appointed. And I believe they have secured themselves multi-million-dollar severance packages when at this moment in time, or certainly a couple of weeks ago, the company couldn't even afford to pay retrenchment packages for the workers that they were laying off.
Yeah, there's so much nonsense with these big corporations like this, and because all the contracts for these kind of high-level managers, they'll make sure they write into those contracts these sort of severance clauses and packages and whatnot, and in order to actually get them out of the business or get them into the business, it often includes huge sign-on or sign-off bonuses, and it's really sickening sometimes when you think about the 2,400 people lost their jobs, whereas these guys are walking away with millions of dollars in the bank. Those incentives are always misaligned, and that's one of the biggest kind of criticisms and kind of negatives of this kind of free market capitalistic society, where the guys at the top are able to dictate the terms, whereas the guys, the working class, are really struggling. So it's sad to see that kind of stuff happen.
Absolutely. Cool. Let's move on to the next one. You basically started 100 Days of Code a couple of days ago. I actually checked in on Twitter. I think it was last week. I was quite intrigued by it, maybe even thinking about joining the movement myself. So kind of wanted to see what specific things you were doing, and it was all gibberish to me. So talk us through. How's it been going?
Yeah, so it's been going well. So I actually just finished today's one now. I was from my lecture. So today was day 32. And so what I've been working through is a computer science class from Harvard University called Introduction to Computer Science, but more colloquially known as CS50. And it is the most popular class at Harvard. So it is the starting point for all Harvard graduates, all Harvard students who are starting computer science. So every famous name you can think of, including Mark Zuckerberg, has taken that course. And what's really amazing about the course is that not only is it done at Harvard itself, but it's completely open sourced and free to the entire internet. So you can go and sit in the class if you're actually at Harvard, or you can do it completely by correspondence, because everything is open source, all web-based, all the tutorials and all the problem sets and everything is all online. And so I can sit here in Johannesburg and take the Harvard course of computer science, which is really cool. And from the course itself, it's lectured by a guy called David Milan, and he is an unbelievable lecturer, like really, really good. His way of kind of taking complex concepts and breaking them down into simple analogies that you can understand if you're outside of the coding world is fantastic, because the course is designed for people who are not only coders in their previous life, but also are coming like me to it for the very first time. And so that kind of concept-based learning has been really cool. And so yeah, I'm 32 days in. I just finished lecture 5 today, which was on HTML and CSS. So moving away from C, which is the language I've been dealing with in the last little bit, and C is horrible. C is really, really tough to learn. So moving into HTML for this week, and then we're going into Python from next week. So really enjoying that course, and that's kind of my first step into this 100 days of code, just to kind of get some fundamentals going. I haven't been as good as I should be. Like I've missed 1 or 2 days in the last week or two, but I'm trying as best as I can to every single day get at least an hour of it in.
I find it amazing that this type of course is actually just offered for free to the world. I mean, what do you think is the reason for that? Are they kind of just giving a taste of what life is like at Harvard? Maybe trying to, is it kind of for a betterment of society as a whole? What do you think the reason is for having this free offering on basically a business that makes their money off of their course material, off of their lectures and all of that type of thing? Why are they doing this?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of two things. I think the first thing is that this is definitely like an intro course. So the whole idea is to try and whet your appetite and kind of give you a taste of what the Harvard looks like, and then try to get you to sign up for their more advanced courses. So that's the first thing. But the second thing, which I think is more important, is that in this computer science community, what I'm learning as I'm starting to dig into some of the coding websites and some of the communities online, a lot of it has this kind of open source mentality. It's this idea that we want to share this with the world. We want everyone to be able to create. We want everyone to be able to have access to this information and this like documentation. And all of the stuff you could learn online by yourself anyway, right? All Harvard is doing is packaging it super well and making it like modularized and giving you problem sets to work on and projects to work on. The actual information is actually out there and democratized. So there is no reason for them to kind of hold on to that information. What they're doing by this is they're building an amazing brand for themselves, because this is known as like one of the key starting points if you want to learn to code. They've had some millions of students have gone through this course. And so from a branding perspective, it's fantastic for Harvard. And like the revenue they lose and people not paying for the course is potentially increased by the way that people think about Harvard as a brand. And also just this open source mentality is really champions computer science as a tool for solving problems. And the actual building blocks of those tools should be free to everybody, I think.
Fair enough. Absolutely makes sense. Moving on to the next one, the South African Airways strike. So we spoke about this. I remember asking you the specific question of whether the proposal that they had, which was I think 5.9% or somewhere in that region, was reasonable with relation to the low inflation rate. Well, not low, but lowest inflation rate SA has seen in some time. And yeah, what have we seen there, Barry?
Yeah, so that one, I think from what I've read, it feels like SAA kind of won that battle. So what happened was they settled eventually on a 5.9% wage increase, which was very similar to the original deal before the strike even happened. So that was very, very strange. They didn't really make much headway. As from what I was reading, it seemed that a lot of the workers who weren't getting paid while on strike were forced to go back to work, and so the strike kind of fell apart a little bit, because after a week or two of not being paid, obviously you still got to pay your rent and pay for your family and all that kind of stuff. So they didn't have the bargaining power there, and so at the end of the day they settled on a 5.9% increase across the board. And not only that, SAA is also, like, just to kind of put the nail on the coffin and make us realize how bad the situation is, they're still talking about potential retrenchments, even in line with the deal that they originally agreed with, right? So originally they were going to look at, an increase, but then potential retrenchments. Now they've got the same deal that they originally had, and they're still talking about laying some people off. So SAA is still in dire situation. There's still serious problems there. But at least it has been resolved, and at least the airline is operating again, albeit at a slightly worse position.
The interesting thing that I heard is in that period of time, the week that they were on strike, I believe none of the flights were actually missed. So I'm not sure if they kind of handed these flights off to other airlines or that type of thing. But it definitely raised the question of whether all of this labor is required. If the airline can still function, ultimately from the flights that they did honor, are these roles absolutely necessary? And I suppose them looking to retrenchments is definitely trying to address that question.
And that's the dirty truth with a lot of South African SOEs. Like, a lot of the SOEs are very bloated, and because people are trying to push job creation and trying to give as many opportunities as possible, plus all the corruption that's happened, a lot of our SOEs are very bloated. And so something like this really can expose the fluff in the system and the unnecessary labor that is involved. So it's, not good for SAA, I don't think. All right, so that's it for episode 2. If we move on to episode 3 now and look at some of the ongoing stories there. The first one we looked at in episode 3 was Uber losing its license in London. So we chatted about how there's a lot of debate as to whether the workers who drive for Ubers are considered as contractors or as employees, and that's kind of playing in the legal system there, and they lost their license quite suddenly. Chad, do you have any updates on what's happened with Uber?
Yes, I mean, as far as I can see, Uber's, as we discussed, they had the option of filing an appeal. They had 21 days since the ruling, and apparently they've done that. So, further to that, we're going to have to just see what happens in the courts. There will definitely be some back and forth about this. There's no doubt about that. And of course, when it's something that concerns privacy and safety with drivers who are unauthorized actually being able to take trips, I don't think it's going to be something that the courts are going to take lightly either.
Yeah, definitely. We'll have to watch and see what happens there. The next story in that episode was, of course, the Tesla Cybertruck reveal, which for me was one of the most exciting launches of the year. They launched that dramatically looking truck, which was a very, very polarizing thing. And just giving you updates on the orders, the last number that we've heard, or that Elon's tweeted at least, was that 250,000 Cybertrucks have been ordered, which is a crazy number. It really shows that the Tesla superfans are there in their droves and they are ready for this truck. A quick reminder that they haven't actually paid for the full truck, right? So in order to order this, I think you have to pay, I think it's $1,000 up front, and all it does is it buys you a seat in the queue. So I think it's unrealistic to expect that all 250,000 of those orders will be fulfilled and people will actually pay the full amount. But nonetheless, that kind of number is staggering. And when you look at the kind of the sales of pickup trucks for other companies, it doesn't even come close, right? And so this number is ginormous for a first version of a new model that no one's actually seen in the real world yet. And it really shows the power of the branding that Tesla has and how they're able to mobilize their army. Even though they had a bit of a fail at the product launch, they mobilized their army and really showing that the numbers are really showing that there is some demand here.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of that 250,000, because I did also watch a couple of videos where somebody, spoke about that holding deposit, which is fairly nominal amount with reference to the full value of the vehicle. Do you think that they will be thinking about some sort of provisioning in terms of not all orders being fulfilled, or do you think they're going to stick to that quantity and potentially add even more?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I don't even know. I don't know if that order is legally binding in any way. I wonder if it's just a cheap way to raise funding. I'm sure they'd look at it as a cheap loan for 0% interest, where they can go and plug that into their R&D. The actual number of trucks, I don't think matters to them because they're still capacity constrained in order their production system, right? So they will only be able to get out a certain number of trucks per month at the beginning, and so the demand is going to exceed what they can make anyway. And so I think from their perspective, they just look at it as cool, free loan, free funding to fund the R&D of this truck. When they get to a stage where they're ready to produce, then it's a matter of producing as fast as possible and just assuming that the demand is going to get there. Whether it's 10% or 50% or 70% of that 250,000, I don't think it matters right now. When it comes closer to the time, then they'll have to look at, cool, how many people are dropping out? What does the demand actually look like? And after the first couple of thousand get out the shop and into the people's hands, what is the feedback then?
Absolutely. Well, certainly still a good number of years until we see the results of that. Moving on to episode 5. We spoke about Eskom load shedding, all of that type of thing. And we've seen some news this last week that 2 senior members have been arrested. I believe they've already stood in the courts. And basically, there's a total of 4 as well, 2 other people. They've kind of pinpointed to various companies. There's been a gross manipulation of contracts relating to the construction of 2 new power stations. I've even heard of there having been mentions of this on Carte Blanche a few years back. And so, basically the wheels of justice starting to turn about 745 million rands worth of fraud. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's good to see. I think that this is the first kind of action we've seen from Cyril Ramaphosa's kind of speech about kind of fighting corruption. And this is the first piece of concrete action within SOEs that we've seen. I think it's going to be the first of many. We know that there's a lot of rotten eggs throughout the system. And so this is probably a scapegoat and kind of a first example of what happens. And hopefully they get the right punishment and it kind of creates the right incentives for the guys who retake those jobs and hopefully maybe fix some of the things within Eskom itself. So it's good to see things happening. I can't speak to whether they're guilty or not. We'll have to wait and see. But I'm really happy to see that there is action being taken and it's not just lip service.
Absolutely. We'll have to see what happens there. Now, in terms of the load shedding situation, give us an update.
I'm very happy to report that everything's back to normal. It's very, very strange. It can go from stage 6, like in a week, and then the next day everything's normal and everyone's forgotten about it. So no one's talking about it anymore. It's not in the news. It's one of those things where once everything's working fine, then it's just old news and we move on with our lives. So as South Africans do, we get very angry for very short periods of time, and then when everything goes fine again, we're all good. So I'm hoping that throughout Christmas we won't have any issues. We have had abundant power the last couple of days and I haven't had to worry about stages or moving to my parents' house or any of that nonsense. And so long may it rain, long may it continue.
Absolutely. I mean, I did hear of a few fires that had happened at some of the plants, and there was a potential sort of hint that these might have been intentional. And so I believe the National Energy Regulator are actually looking into that. But yeah, obviously it didn't affect the power grid in too much of a material way. So that's good to hear. Now, Barry, you've done a lot of looking into Trump and the impeachment that actually happened since we last spoke about it. This only having happened in America a few times in history. Tell us what you've learned.
Yeah, so this is obviously one of the biggest stories coming out of the US, probably the whole year, and it's really, really important for the US and for their future elections coming up in 2020. I think I want to preface this by saying that I don't know what to believe when I read things, because you can read 10 different articles and have 10 different ideas, and I think one of the reasons for this drama is because of all this polarization across the left and the right. So let me try and give you the fairest representation that I can, with the preface that I'm using secondhand sources here. So basically, the House of Representatives voted to impeach Trump, and we chatted about that in the previous episode, and they actually ended up winning that charge, and Trump was impeached by the House of Representatives. The charges laid against him was he was accused of having withheld $400 million worth of military aid to Ukraine that was already allocated by Congress, and a White House meeting for their new president, right? And what Trump was allegedly trying to do was withhold that money so that Ukraine looked into potential damaging material on Joe and Hunter Biden. Now, Joe Biden was the vice president of the Obama administration, and so Trump is trying to weaken allegedly, Trump is trying to weaken Joe Biden's stand and the Democrats' stand for the 2020 election. So that's basically the charge that was laid against him, and the Democrats are saying that this amounts to an abuse of presidential power, using the office for personal political gain and to the detriment of national security. So quite a serious charge to be laid against a president. And in addition to that, he also was obstructing the Congress by refusing to cooperate with this inquiry. So it's two charges. It's the abuse of power and it's the obstruction of Congress while they were trying to do the inquiry. So the House of Representatives voted, and now Trump has been technically impeached. And what happens now is that it now moves to the Senate, and the Senate needs to vote on what to do with this impeachment. So they can either convict him, and then he leaves the presidential office, or they can acquit him, and he remains in his position, and the kind of gets thrown away. So that's the next step in this process. Where this gets tricky now is that Trump and the Republicans control the voting power within the Senate, right? In order to convict Trump, they need to vote 2/3 majority against him, right? So they need 66% of the vote, and at the moment, Trump has 53% of the vote in the Senate. So unless a significant portion of his own party vote against him, this looks like he may be acquitted. However, we don't know what's going to happen, right? No one knows exactly what's going to happen, and I would imagine there are some people within his party that are seeing the writing on the wall for Trump and might think that a change is needed, and maybe they will vote against Trump. But again, seeing the bipartisan kind of politics we've seen in the last year or so, the left and the right hate each other so much that I wouldn't be surprised if they stick to their party lines and they vote as expected, and this gets acquitted altogether. When it comes to the Senate votes, Trump wanted this to happen immediately. So Trump went ballistic when he found out the news, and on Twitter he went berserk. And he wants it to go to the Senate immediately because he believes the case isn't strong enough, they don't have enough evidence, and he knows that he has the numbers in the House. The Democrats, on the other hand, are trying to stall because they obviously need to figure out how now to turn that 53% deficit into a 66% on their side of the coin. And so they're trying to delay and trying to get the right witnesses into the Senate to try and change the minds of the people they need to change the minds of. So it's really a battle right now where it's going to the Senate. Whether it happens today or whether it happens in 2 months' time, that's the debate. And both sides are obviously fighting their respective battles. It's still too early to say what we think. I think that the safe money would be on Trump being acquitted because of the voting power he has in the Senate. But as we've seen with this election and the whole of the US, that anything can happen. Anything can happen, and we don't actually know what to expect. Chad, do you have any thoughts on Trump?
For me, it's a lose-lose situation for Trump. I mean, even if he does get acquitted, this has to now follow him around for the rest of his tenure as president. Now, when, the whole House doesn't have faith in you, that surely can't be a good thing, to keep around while you have to serve out the rest of your tenure. So yeah, for me, it's just a lose-lose. Obviously, if he does get convicted, even worse. And as you said, I think it's really interesting when it comes down to a vote. As much as the two parties may hate each other, some might just have that real strong moral compass, and some might have more of an insight into what Trump is actually like as a character. So they may switch their vote. So we'll have to see what happens.
Just on the lose-lose situation, normally I would agree with you, but I just want to bring up the point that Trump has survived some crazy things in his whole election tenure, right? He's said some stupid things, and there's been some serious allegations laid against him before, and he's managed to survive and somehow come out stronger against those allegations. I think we're in a society in the US specifically where there's so little trust put in media and trust in people saying things and writing things that there's a chance that he gets acquitted, and Trump uses this as an advantage to say, look at the mainstream media and look at the left who are trying to put me down. And it might actually embolden some of his supporters to be like, no, we're going to stick by our man, we're going to stick by Trump going forward because they're trying to lie about him and trying to get him out of office. So I think it's interesting here. I think that there is a small risk that Trump actually gets strengthened by this if he gets acquitted, because the Trump supporters are so desperate to change the status quo and to kind of fight back against this radical left, as they call it, that I'm hoping not, but maybe there's a chance that if he gets acquitted, he can turn this into a election tactic to say, look at what they tried to do to me and they still can't stop us. Trying to appeal to that tribal instinct.
Well, yeah, definitely interesting view, and I completely see how you got to that. So, yeah, we'll have to watch how that develops over the course of next year. Now, the last episode we spoke about basically some closure coming to a very drawn out process, which is Brexit and the UK general election. So this only happened last week, so there's not too much to report on it, but we did see the Queen's speech, basically opening Parliament last week. And yeah, essentially some of the sort of highlights of that speech, she reiterated that her government's priority is to deliver Brexit by the 31st of January. So this obviously being top of mind again, I think it's high priority. The Queen is reiterating it, and sort of that's an important thing to see. Obviously, on the back of that, she's also said that her government needs to set up a future relationship with the EU based on a free trade agreement, and also start trade negotiations with other leading global economies. Obviously, we've seen Boris and Trump having pretty good interactions, so I'm pretty sure that's where that will start to kick off as well. Obviously, we also saw Theresa May doing a bit of a tour through the course of last year, doing some dancing in Africa. I'm not sure that those are global leading economies, but I definitely see them striking some deals there in the likes of South Africa. And those types of things. We saw the Queen touch on basically the healthcare system, and in reiterating that a new visa will be brought into the fore, which allows qualified doctors and health professionals to have fast-tracked entry into the United Kingdom. There will be a new modern, fair, points-based immigration system. Now, this is what we spoke about last week. So this is definitely something that is top of mind as well, to get basically skilled workers opportunity to come into the UK. And yeah, basically some other interesting things. So for example, measures will be introduced to encourage flexible working. Obviously, as the workplace is modernizing throughout, I think this is quite an important one to see. Basically, net zero greenhouse gases by 2050. Also talking about a bill and basically putting into place a regulator and essentially, basically a one point of contact for this. So, what do you make of this? Is there anything here that comes as a surprise, or would you have liked to see anything more focused on?
No, I think this is all to be expected. I think we chatted about all these points, and it kind of makes sense that that's kind of the way they're going to go. I still want to see this actually happen, right? So it's still just words at this point, and we'll have to watch and keep them accountable and see what happens when it comes to the actual policy that gets put in place. But they're moving in the right direction, and as you say, it feels like a little bit more closure. I hope that's true, and I hope it doesn't go backwards in the weeks to come. Chad, I was wondering if in chatting to your UK counterparts, have you noticed any change in mood or change in feeling in London based on the result of the election, or is it kind of just business as usual?
I definitely have noticed a feeling. I think a lot of people are very disappointed. So, funny enough, in London, there's an overwhelming. If you look at the map, it's overwhelmingly voted in favour of Labour. Now, I haven't got to grips with kind of what's happened in recent times and why everyone feels this way. But it certainly is interesting because even just going into work, I can kind of hear everyone muttering under their breath, "Oh, now that Boris is in power," type of thing. It's kind of one of those. So we'll definitely have to see why that is the sentiment. But certainly I think a lot of people are happy that this is now coming to an end in terms of Brexit. At least everyone knows where they stand. It's a lot better than the kind of uncertainty that has basically masked this whole process from beginning to potential end now. We'll definitely have to see if the sentiment changes at all over time. But certainly this being one of the most packed lists of proposed legislation in recent times, and for me, that can only be a good thing. Challenging the status quo, looking at how things are done, bringing into play new legislation. The Queen even speaking about the Constitution, and looking at a potential review of that. So, from where I'm standing, I get the cynics in terms of characters like Boris and like Trump. But if we see progress, should we be questioning that, or should we just be happy with good progress?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think 2020 is going to be that earmark year where Brexit is finally, hopefully, finished, and we're going to get to see what the implications are on a real basis. Okay, it's all been theoretical up to this point, but seeing what happens if Britain finally gets out of the EU and charts this brand new course, what happens to the country, what happens to the economy, what happens to the people going in and out, and do these policy changes actually help mitigate some of the risks and some of the downsides of this Brexit? We'll have to wait and see.
Let's wait and see for that. Now let's move on to our next segment.
Stuff I found interesting.
So, being the last episode of 2019, Barry came up with a system of awards. So we got to award our favorite various things for the year. So I'll let Barry get stuck into his award for his favorite movie of 2019.
Yeah, I think the key part here is that this is the favorite. It's not best. Originally, I'd written best on the sheet, but I realized that could cause some drama. So this is highly subjective, and it's based not only on the movies that it's based on movies and books and stuff that we've seen in 2019. So obviously we haven't seen everything. So if your favorite thing isn't on this list, I do apologize. Please let us know about it. We'll definitely catch up. And also in my mind, Chad, I'm not sure if you agree, it's not necessarily, it didn't have to be made in 2019. It just has to be enjoyed in 2019. So for example, there's...
Oh, well, that changes a few things.
Oh, does it change your answers?
Definitely, yeah, that changes my answer. But do carry on.
Okay. Well, I'll carry on. Give you some time to think about that. The only reason I'm saying that is because I'm not 100% sure all of my stuff is 2019 specific, so I'm just buying myself some time there. But yeah, the first award for this section is the favorite movie of 2019. And so I'm going to give my favorite movie of 2019 to Joker, which was a movie that came out towards the end of the year and really kind of caused a huge social discussion around mental illness, around social difficulties, and around violence in our society. And the Joker is obviously a famous villain from superhero lore and is probably one of most people's favorite villains when it comes to this kind of stuff. And this movie kind of dug beneath the villain's mask and looked at his personal life and really showed a more authentic and more, I think, generous view of why the Joker became the Joker. And it's shot incredibly well. Joaquin Phoenix did an amazing job at portraying the character. And for me, it was a spectacular movie that I will remember for a long, long time. So that's my favorite movie for the year. Honorable mentions from my side go to Quentin Tarantino's new movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. A very long, slow movie, as some of his movies can be, but really, really well done and really kind of shows a Hollywood of the 1960s that was really fascinating. Another one is Marriage Story, which was on Chad's recommendation, which I really enjoyed. I actually watched that a few days ago. And then Avengers Endgame, which was one of the biggest movies of the year, and I thought it was a masterpiece. So those are my honorable mentions, but my favorite movie of 2019 goes to The Joker.
Amazing. I still haven't watched The Joker. Every time I want to go and see it, my fiance just hasn't been in the mood. I think it's off of cinemas now, so I'm going to have to sort of sort myself out on that one, but I definitely need to watch it. So as I said, my my results have changed on the back of the parameters that we have now defined. So I'd probably say my favorite movie to watch in 2019, which might come as a bit of a surprise, was actually Bohemian Rhapsody, the story of Queen and, of course, Freddie Mercury, the absolute legend. One of the best vocals of time, in my opinion. I just found it fascinating just to kind of get a look behind the scenes of, what would have been the reality of Queen and how they just changed the world, really. Great acting there as well. Basically, the guy who played Freddie Mercury, coming from Mr. Robot, where he played a pretty odd character. I think he really, really perfectly portrayed the lead singer of Queen, and I really think he portrayed Freddie really well and gave us a glimpse into the things that he was going through. Just a remarkable life and a remarkable man. And then, in terms of my honorable mentions, obviously Marriage Story I thoroughly enjoyed as well. Basically, yesterday or the day before, I watched The Irishman, also on Netflix, a 3.5-hour movie.
Wow.
Starring De Niro, Al Pacino, and a couple of others. I thought that was a fascinating film to watch as well. And although it was incredibly long, it didn't feel too long for me. Just again, a really interesting glimpse at what life was like, for the mob. This being portrayed as a result of some true stories about a guy who paints houses. Paints houses really just an expression for basically blowing brains onto walls. Pretty terrible, really. Just a really interesting way that was portrayed. I like the sort of parallels drawn between the passage of time, kind of just how the sort of the interview nature of it, but also then crossing back to various stages of his life, and having lost all contact with his daughter, really starting to question those choices, which I thought was quite an interesting one to watch. So shall we move on to music and your favorite artist of 2019?
So yes, looking at the music of 2019, we're looking at the artists that we really enjoyed throughout the year. And there's been a lot of amazing music this year, and I think it's been a really good year for music. For me, the artist that really stood out and has become my favorite artist very, very quickly is an Irish singer-songwriter by the name of Dermot Kennedy. Now, Dermot Kennedy has kind of come out of nowhere. He released an EP in 2018, which was a small release, but his first album came out in 2019. And he really is a very soulful singer and guitarist. And what I really enjoy about his music is that it's very genuine and authentic, and the songwriting is fantastic. The lyrics are amazing, but the soul and the rasp in his voice just get into my bones for some reason. And so I've had his album on repeat. I've been annoying all my friends and family by just playing it again and again and again. And so I'm really glad to see he's starting to get into the limelight. I've seen him on Ellen and a few other shows now, so he's starting to get into that space. And hopefully we see a lot of cool new music coming from him in the future. But as a singer-songwriter, he's become one of my favorites instantly, and probably my favorite of 2019 itself. Honorable mention from my side goes to Billie Eilish, which is probably the biggest breakout in mainstream media this year. I wasn't a fan of her right at the beginning, but after watching a few of the interviews and getting to know her a little bit and seeing like the little bedroom that they recorded that album in, it really grew my appreciation for her music. And then after listening to it more and more, it's really grown on me in the last couple weeks. And so I think Billie Eilish is definitely the biggest breakout of 2019. And an honorable mention from my side. Chad, on your side?
Fantastic. Basically when I saw this pop up on the list yesterday, I thought, what better place to look than from where I listen to my music to anyway. So basically, if you've got Spotify, I'm sure you would have seen 2019 Wrapped. It basically summarizes all of your most played stuff of the year. And for me, it was Ed Sheeran, surprisingly. Obviously Ed Sheeran's been big for some time, but his collaborations album that he released this year definitely hit a note with me, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. I kind of just listened to it on repeat. Certainly in the tail end of the year, I have to agree with you, Billie Eilish, and certainly the sort of single "Everything I Wanted" that was released fairly recently, I could just listen to on repeat. Absolute banger of a track. And yeah, for me, as you say, I think let's just chat about that for a second. So Billie Eilish and her brother basically produced this album and sort of all the music they've put out together exclusively by themselves in their bedroom. They've got a 2-bedroom house, which is not big at all. Phineas, her brother, he basically is the producer, and he's actually signed to the record label that I'm working at the moment, which is AWOL. So yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? The power of this decade, like how somebody is able to produce an album that touches radio waves from their bedroom and not on expensive gear. I mean, I looked at the microphone that he used, and it's really not the best of the best.
It's really an amazing story, and it really shows how the barriers to entry into the music industry have come down so significantly over the past couple of years. In the past, if you wanted to become a huge pop star, you needed a huge recording contract, you needed a studio to record in, you needed all the fancy gear and the fancy musicians and all of that stuff. Whereas right now, as you say, you can sit in your bedroom, as they did, with an average microphone and a computer and create music that then becomes absolutely globally sensational. And so watching that happen is really fantastic. And what it does is it allows talented people who don't have the resources or don't have traditional networks, traditional kind of opportunities to actually compete in the global landscape. All you need is a Spotify account to upload your stuff onto, and if your music is good enough, it can go huge and you can have the kind of success that Billie Eilish and Phineas have had. And so it's really amazing to see, and it really bodes well for the future of music, where everyone has the opportunity to put it out there and kind of let the best music win, regardless of whether you know the record producers, whether you know the studio guys, or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so watching that happen has been really cool. What I found amazing was I watched an interview with Billie Eilish on James Corden, and she was saying that she remembers about a year ago Phineas in that bedroom telling her that he was going to make her the biggest pop star in the world. And if that is true, if you actually said that, it's an amazing quote. If you actually said that, that is incredible. That from kind of visualizing your success, like noticing that Billie Eilish is the talent and he's got the producing chops behind it, and realizing that you've got something special here, that breathy, raspy voice that Billie Eilish has. And being able to spot that and decide, cool, we're going to sit in that bedroom for months at a time, create this album and put it out into the world, and now she's a household name. So that's an amazing story, and I really hope that it's true. I really hope he said that, because that's a movie waiting to happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that just gives me absolute goosebumps. There's something about this kind of rise to fame for just normal people who have absolutely amazing talents that is just so inspiring, and yeah, definitely gave me goosebumps there. Shall we move on to your favorite book of 2019? I don't have much to contribute here, but let's see what you enjoyed the most.
Yeah. So I was looking at my Goodreads for 2019, and I think I've read 23 books this year. I think that's the total by my last estimate. And so my favorite one for the year is a book by one of my favorite authors, Cal Newport, and the book is called Digital Minimalism. And what it talks about is how our cell phones and how our devices have really ingrained themselves in our lives to such an extent that it's kind of harmed our ability to focus and our ability to pay attention to one specific thing. So a lot of, we chatted about my social media detox and a lot about addiction to cell phones and that kind of stuff. And a lot of that thinking comes from this book from Cal Newport. And he kind of puts forward this, what seems a radical strategy of getting rid of most of your social media entirely and focusing on the important things in your life and seeing them for what they are, seeing them as tools to accomplish certain objectives in your life and not as merely things in your life that you have because everyone else has it. So the book kind of says to you, why do you have Facebook? Why do you have Twitter? If there's a specific reason, so if it's to keep up with a certain group of people, if it's to kind of follow news or follow certain things you want to keep up with, make sure that you're only using the tool for those specific use cases. And you don't get sucked into the whole ecosystem where you're on Twitter to find that piece of news, but all of a sudden, 20 minutes later, you found that you've been scrolling and clicking because you got caught up in the addiction cycle that these products actually design. And so I found it a very refreshing take on social media, a refreshing take on why do we have these tools? Why are we using social media? And if you're a little bit more intentional and conscious about the kind of actions and the behaviors you're exhibiting on these platforms, you can save yourself some time, get out of that cycle of scrolling until your eyes bleed, and actually use these platforms for the tremendous power that they have. So I think it's a fantastic book, and I'd recommend it to anybody. That's my book of the year. Honorable mentions from my side go to the Leonardo da Vinci autobiography that I finished by Walter Isaacson. That was incredible. Wasn't written in 2019, but I finished it in 2019, and was an unbelievable book about Leonardo da Vinci. We chatted about him in a previous episode. And then from a fiction perspective, actually the book I mentioned, I think it was last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. A book that I didn't expect to enjoy at all, but it was a absolutely fascinating read and a really, really beautiful story, fantastic writing, and probably my favorite fiction book of the year. Chad?
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, I'm quite guilty on this one. So my choice is really by default, as I only actually finished one book this year, which is really not good. There's a couple in progress. I'm about halfway through. I definitely need to, we'll get back to that. So the only book that I did finish was one by Richard Templer, and it's called The Rules of Life. It's got fairly decent reviews, I'd say. It's definitely not a sort of fully coherent book. Every couple of pages is essentially a new rule, and it's basically just a couple of those basic reminders of things that we need to do to enjoy life, to appreciate life, and really just go back to basics. It's one of those books that, there's no radical new ideas, but I think it's a good handbook to have, when going through times of challenge or going through a crossroads or that kind of thing. It splits it up into various elements of our life, kind of our partner, work, personal outlook and keeping healthy and all of that type of stuff. And so for me, it was just a really good basic handbook for general maintenance. So for me, I quite enjoyed it, but as I said, that's only by default because it's the only book I actually finished. So let's move on to your favorite podcast moment of 2019. Ours are both the same here, so you'd have to see it on our bloopers to actually enjoy it. But Barry, talk us through this one.
This one hurts. So this was the day, if you remember, guys, where I had to change location because Escom had kind of thrown a spanner in the works, and also Chad has started his new job. So we were filming at like 10 p.m. in the evening. It had been a long day, and so we were both in a bit of a silly mood. And when I was trying to explain the Google CEO, I was trying to pronounce his name. And for some unknown reason, I think it was the fatigue / the craziness of the situation, I couldn't get his name right without laughing. And the moment I started laughing, then Chad started laughing. And we spent the next probably 10 minutes uncontrollably laughing, crying our eyes out, like we could not start speaking again. And we went through that. I think actors call it corpsing, when you just can't stop laughing, and it's so silly and stupid, and no one else would understand. But it was one of the funniest moments, and certainly my favorite moments of 2019. There's something life-giving about laughing until your stomach hurts and tears are flowing down your face, and you just simply can't stop. And that really is, laughter is the best medicine. So that was probably my favorite moments of 2019. I've really enjoyed this podcast, and that's probably the highlight for me, was that moment of not being able to stop laughing.
I completely agree. I haven't had that in quite some time. I think you have to, it doesn't happen with every person. You certainly have to feel comfortable with the person to, get to that stage. And I was literally crying nonstop. So if you haven't watched it, definitely go through our bloopers and have a look at that. But I mean, the natural question that I asked Barry there was, how do news producers and news presenters and people who are live on air, compose themselves after moments like this, and get the business done? Luckily, we are able to clip it out and still produce a coherent episode with this, stuck at the tail end in bloopers. But certainly the people in the live game are incredibly talented to basically contain that down and still be able to compose themselves. But that was incredibly funny. I thoroughly enjoyed it as well. And the funniest part for me is that we actually just cut his name out of the final episode to actually just get past it. So Barry, can you tell me the name of Google's CEO?
Chad, I knew you were going to put me on the spot. Google's current CEO, his name is Sundar Pichai.
Fantastic. There we go.
Come
Victory
on.
to Barry. Well done.
I think you should put a crowd cheering sound effect in there when I say it.
Let's do it. Cool. Shall we move to the next one?
Let's do it.
Looking ahead.
So while putting together the basically the skeleton bones of this episode last night, I was kind of not sure what to put, but actually found something. Apple reportedly having a secret satellite project. So this has been reported by Bloomberg, and they are essentially investing in technology to beam data to devices. Now, it's fairly broad. We don't really know too much more at this stage, but a couple of theories coming out. So potentially this is to boost internet coverage, trying to make Apple maybe a bit more independent of those third-party data providers, or to potentially create a network that essentially just connects Apple devices to each other. So yeah, essentially all Apple devices would be able to communicate without having to pay an extra subscription. Well, certainly that's what it seems like. What are your thoughts of this, Barry?
I think it's fascinating. I think it's another example, if these rumors are true, that Apple is looking again to try and control their own ecosystem. And imagine if they could remove the actual mobile providers out of their ecosystem and make it entirely Apple. It gives you yet another reason to stay within their gambit. And so if it is true, it's fascinating. I don't know the technicalities around satellites. I don't know what's possible and what's not. What I do know is that satellite technology itself and kind of the network of satellites that is orbiting Earth is really a really interesting resource that I think is undervalued. If you look at how much of our world relies on satellite technology and it relies on the data and the information that gets beamed across the world, those satellites are incredibly important. And so the war for resources and the war for data and the war for all of this information actually comes from those satellites. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all if Apple are looking at that very, very seriously, as how to use that to their best advantage and how to ensure that the Apple ecosystem remains as clean and as insular as possible, because that's how they get you to buy their laptops and their phones and their services, etc. So yeah, I'm fascinated by this. We'll have to wait and see what happens. What do you think, Chad?
Definitely. I mean, I think it is an interesting one. So there's a couple of other sort of noteworthy companies who are looking into this at the moment. An example being SpaceX. And the other interesting thing is we've seen in the past some failed attempts at launching satellites. So I think, yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to watch. And yeah, basically, Tim Cook has apparently also given his stamp of approval, and he's quite keen on pursuing this further. Obviously, these are just reports, so we'll have to see what happens. But certainly, you know, when somebody so senior has buy-in to a project like this, I think it's definitely something to look at quite seriously. Let's move on to our next insert.
Develop and grow.
So in our first podcast episode, actually, I basically implored listeners to start looking at their goals for 2020. And when casting out the skeleton of this episode again, Barry had put down his goals, and I realized I had actually not put in the work myself to put some goals onto the paper. So let's start with Barry. What are your goals for next year?
Yeah, so this is a small subset of them. There's some goals, obviously, that are quite private, and so I didn't want to share. So these are some of the goals that are publicly available, and then I'm happy to share. And I'm hoping that you listeners will hold us accountable for these. I hope that in the year to come, that if we haven't achieved these things, that you'll get on our backs and in the YouTube comments and in the social media comments and let us know. But some of them, the first one for me, which is one that I had for this year that I didn't manage to do, was to run my first marathon. So I've run a bunch of half marathons in the past, and I really want to give it a go at running a full one. And so my goal for 2020 is to find a marathon and actually go and run it. And it doesn't matter how slow or how fast, I just want to get over the line and finish the thing. And I think that's quite an achievable one for me, and I'm hoping that I'll get that done in 2020. The second one for me is to finish my master's thesis and have it published in a journal. I wanted to put a prestigious journal here, but I don't know if that's unrealistic. But I've been working very, very hard on my thesis, and my friends and family laugh at me because I've taken a long time to finish it. But the reason is I want it to be really good and I want it to be publishable. So my goal is to contribute something to the field of philosophy, and my thesis is almost done. And so the goal is to finish the thesis, and that needs to be done by March because I need to finish it and actually get it submitted.
Right.
But after that, I want to submit it to various journals and see if I can get it published in a journal. I also intend to use it to go and speak at various conferences as well. So it's kind of a bedrock asset that I wanted to create and hopefully get into the various philosophical journals around the world and see what happens from there.
Amazing.
So that's my second goal. The third one is something that I'm going to tease here because I thought I like the idea of teasing it. It's something I've been working on for a long time now and I haven't really told anybody. Is a brand and a company called Artists and Soldiers, which I want to launch in 2020. Now, I'm going to be specifically vague here, but basically, I want a vehicle to be able to share some of the interesting creative projects and writing and speaking and videos that I want to create in 2020. And this is kind of going to be the home for that content, whether it comes to video, audio, or written. And so I'm not going to say anything more than that. I want to launch it in 2020, so please keep a watch out. But I thought I'd tease it here first so that the podcast listeners who've got to this point in the show, you get a little bit of exclusivity there.
Amazing.
The fourth one is that I've been wanting to challenge myself with some language learning for a while. I think there's a stigma around learning languages after you've left school. Like, it certainly is a lot harder to learn at this age than it is at, say, 13 or 14. But I sometimes feel a little bit sad that I only know one language. So I only really speak English. My Afrikaans is woeful at best. And so I'd love to learn another language. And being in South Africa, I think a really cool language to learn, especially for a white person like me, is to learn some Zulu. So I'd love to start learning Zulu in 2020. And so my goal is to start figuring out, cool, do I need a teacher? Do I need online resources? How am I going to go about doing it? I haven't done the work to figure out what the systems we're going to put in place for Zulu yet are, but it's a goal for me to try and get some rudimentary Zulu under my belts for 2020 with a view of becoming fluent over time. So that's a goal for me. And then the last one is doing some meal prep. So I've seen a lot of YouTube videos about people who cook huge amounts of food on the Sunday and then put it in Tupperwares for the rest of the week. And that helps them keep on track, because during the week, we all know people get busy, things get hectic, and it's very easy to go and just order food or go and buy expensive food because it's convenient and you don't feel like cooking. And meal prep tries to solve some of that by pre-cooking meals, so that when you're lazy and tired during the week, you just pull out the Tupperware in the microwave and you're good to go. And so I want to start doing that myself so I can eat healthier during the week and not eat out as much. So those are my 5 goals I want to share. Please do hold me accountable for them, both Chad and the listeners, because I need to make sure that actually happens in 2020. Chad?
Yeah, I definitely will. And certainly if you're in Europe again, I'd like to join you for the first one. Depending on which marathon you sign up for. I've also not done one, and would love to. It's not on my list, but certainly if you are in Europe, I would definitely love to join you on that one.
I'm going to hold you to that.
In terms of... Sounds good. In terms of the others, artists and soldiers sounds fascinating. We'll keep our eyes peeled. And again, I think we've got some very loyal listeners from some of the discussions that I've had in the past. People are really keen to know what Barry's up to. So I think you'll definitely have a lot of people keen to find out what happens there. And then just in terms of the master's thesis and the journal, what is the sort of process there? This is a world that is completely foreign to me. So how do you approach getting a thesis published, and what's the sort of likely timelines and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so what happens is you present some sort of... So every journal has got different criteria. So a journal will tell to you, cool, how long should it be? What kind of topics does it cover, etc., etc. And if your piece matches that mandate, what you'll do is you submit it online to the journal, and you submit it in a double-blind way. So there's no name or no identifying factors of you on that piece of information. And then it gets sent to that journal's what they call reviewers. So it's a panel of people who look through all the submissions they receive and decide what is worth going in the journal and what is not. And that is done on a double-blind basis. So you have to have at least 2 people in that panel agreeing that your work is good enough to go into the journal. If they agree on that, which is a very small proportion because they get lots of submissions, so it's very, very tough to even get to that stage. Once you get to that stage, they will then contact you again, and they go through an editing process to make sure it meets their requirements when it comes to formatting and language, and make sure everything is set from their perspective. So that can take some time. And then if you get through all of that and you finally get it submitted, then it gets published in that journal, and you'll get notes with the citation. And so what that means is that anyone then who's reading that journal wants to use your work can cite your work going forward. And that's kind of the home for your work for the rest of time. So what's really cool about that is that is how in the academic landscape you actually contribute to the field. Citations is kind of the scoreboard when it comes to academics. And so the more citations you have, the more impact theoretically you've had on the field. Obviously, there's lots of nonsense here because the journals are very, very highly controlled, and the people who hold the power over those journals hold the power over the academic profession. So in the last couple of years, there's actually been a bit of a pushback against journals and people looking to open source, in a sense, their work and put it online for free. And there's definitely an argument for that. From my perspective, from a personal development perspective, I want to know if I'm good enough to publish in a journal like that. And so that's why the goal's there for me. I will still share all my stuff online for free. I'll never withhold that information, because another one of the key aspects here is that these articles are often put behind a paywall because these guys need to make money and be sustainable in some way.
Right.
And so I never, the reason I'm putting it is not to withhold that information. I still want to share it with everybody and get those ideas out there. But it would be a great point of pride for me if I was able to get it published in a journal and really show that my work is good enough to be put alongside the other academic heavyweights across the world.
Incredible. Well, yeah, we'll definitely keep our eyes peeled, and yeah, hopefully you get one of the prestigious journals that you're looking for. Yeah, the other thing is Sawubona Uberi Unjani.
Ooh, Ngikona Unjani. I'm so bad. I'm so bad.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, so we'll definitely see how Barry Zulu is getting along next year as well. In terms of my goals for the next year, as I said, basically had a bit of a thought last night. Obviously, as Barry said, some of the goals are personal, so not going to put those down. But certainly on a cosmetic note, getting married in September, so I want to be in the best shape as possible. I've set myself a goal for body fat percentage between 10 and 12%. So yeah, although that is kind of just purely cosmetic, it is one of those days, it happens once in a lifetime, so you kind of want to be at your best as possible. Obviously, I want to be absolutely present on my wedding day. I really want to not overthink it, not think ahead, not look back. I want to be there on the day, take every single moment. I want to kind of literally just be enjoying every second, celebrating with family and friends, and obviously just enjoying the special moment that it, I'm sure, will be. The next one is to complete another Ironman 70.3, but the goal here now being under 7 hours. Now, I wasn't far over the 7 hour mark the last time, but I definitely want to make it for the next one. Next one is to keep the podcast going strong throughout the year. And to add a sort of sub goal here, I want to make sure that I honor the time slot every time. The last couple of episodes, Barry's been very patient with me in waiting 15 minutes to 30 minutes of delay on my side, whether due to the tube or whether due to me having man flu today. I really appreciate that on Barry's side, and I need to kind of get better at that. So that's definitely one of the goals. The next one is to read at least one book per month. Now, I think looking back on this last year and saying I read one book is absolutely dismal. So yeah, one book a month. Please hold me to that. Hopefully I'm going to bring up a book within each month as a topic to chat about. So yeah, please do hold me to that. And then the last one, which is kind of one of the goal setting attributes is that sort of SMART acronym. It needs to be specific, measurable, attainable, all of that type of thing. And this one's not really very specific, but what it is just to kind of try and get closer to finding contentment in the work that I do. Which is really quite a hard one. As I said, it's not a specific thing, but I kind of just want to reach a point where, I'm content. I'm sort of, not bursting for joy every day I enter the office, but not dreading going in. So, that trying to find that is something that I think is quite important for me next year as well.
Chad, I've got an idea. I love that goal, and I've got an idea how to make it measurable. We were chatting about journaling on a previous episode. So why don't you set like a monthly reminder in your calendar to sit down for 10 minutes and write on how you're feeling about your job at that particular point in time, and you put that all into a document, and then in December 2020, you look back at that document and you read what you've written and you see how you were feeling in each month to get a sense of your contentment levels depending on what was happening at that time. That's just an idea to help you measure that a little bit.
A very, very good idea. I think that'll definitely be one to do. And yeah, an interesting one as well. You spoke about Cole Newport. I actually downloaded a book. This is again one of the reasons why I haven't finished, because I've kind of read halfway through various books, where he challenges the passion hypothesis, i.e., that all meaningful work, all work that we enjoy is related to our passions, and he kind of challenges that. So I think once I finish that read, I'll also potentially have a better view as to how to actually measure this goal throughout the year. But I think tracking progress throughout the year is definitely a good idea. So shall we move on to the next one? We don't have any questions from a listener, but Barry's got a great idea. Let's play the jingle and then we'll get to it.
What's on your mind?
Barry, tell me your idea.
Yeah, so the idea was we get questions from listeners. We don't often ask each other questions. So I thought that for this last one of 2019, we would each ask each other one question that we hadn't prepared. So for the listeners at home or the watchers, there's nothing on this document, so we don't know what's coming. So we're going to throw a question at each other and just see what the response is. So Chad, do you want to start with me or should I start?
I mean, yeah. Let me start. I've got my question.
Okay.
So this one, could actually be a whole topic for another day. But yeah, certainly something that I find quite interesting. And whenever I've ever socialized with Barry in the past, he will very politely decline the consumption of alcohol. So I wanted to ask Barry basically how he's come to that, how he, still holds up against peer pressure, because, sometimes a group of friends will really rally behind the cause, and ultimately whether he's found to not benefit from social situations by not having alcohol. So, please let me know there.
Yeah, so that's it's one of the main questions I get asked by all my friends because it's very rare for someone to not drink alcohol, and in my perspective, I've actually never drunk alcohol, so I haven't had a sip of it my entire life. So it's not like I was drinking and then I stopped, which is more common. I've actually never done it, and when I try and answer this question, it's too easy for me to give some sort of cliche response about a reason for it. At the end of the day, when I look back on it, it's a collection of different decisions that I've made relating to various things, right? So it's a personal choice. It's not by religion. It's not by any kind of dogmatic approach. The reason I've made it is because... Well, the reason I think that I made it back then and I've continued to it is because I see it as it gets in the way of social interaction and gives you a kind of a crutch to use to have fun and kind of get yourself into social situations. I never wanted to be reliant on alcohol in order to have a good time or in order to speak to friends or to be able to dance in a nightclub or any of that kind of stuff. I never wanted that crutch. I wanted to be able to get into those states and get into those situations just with my own personality and my own person. The second thing for me is that I personally think alcohol is not great for the human body. I think that the effects that it has on a long-term basis on your immune system and on your liver and on your body in general is not good. And also I struggle to identify with the idea that you lose the whole the next day. If you go out and you get really drunk the one night, you go out the next day and you've got this hangover and you lose that entire day. And I never wanted to be in that situation. The third piece is that when it comes to my personality, knowing myself, abstinence is much easier for me than moderation. Right, so I could easily say that, cool, I'm going to go out and have one beer a night, and that's a perfectly reasonable thing, and I don't, a lot of my friends do it, and that's completely fine. Like, I've got no issues with that myself. But when it comes to, I struggle with moderation. Once I start doing something, I tend to overdo it, and in various other points of my life that I've done it with various other things, other vices. But alcohol for me is, if I can stay away from it completely, it reduces that need for it at all, and I'm living a much happier life, I think. When it comes to the peer pressure, yeah, it's something I've dealt with my entire childhood. It was a lot tougher in my kind of teen years, where the macho thing to do and kind of the cool thing to do in those situations as a teenager is to drink, and going to those parties and turning all of that down is a challenge. But what happens is the more you do it, the better you get. So it's building a muscle, right? The more you say no to it, the easier it is to say the next no. And because there's no slippery slope, because it's always a no from me, my friends have got to understand that I'm still going to have fun with you. I'm still going to go out into the nightclub until 4 a.m. I'm still going to dance and do silly things. I'm still going to have all that fun. I'm not a wet blanket at all. But the only thing is different is that I don't drink. And once your friends realize that, and often you find out who your real friends are and who your fake friends are, once your real friends find out that, then it's not an issue anymore. And so right now in my life, it's not an issue other than on first dates. So first dates is rather awkward because you'll go with a lovely lady, you'll go to a bar or whatnot, and you let the lady order first, of course. So she orders her glass of wine, and then it comes to me, and I ask for my Coke Zero, and she looks at you like, what? And you don't know this person. It's like the first time you interact, and you have to try and explain this whole situation. No, I don't drink. You're more than welcome to have your wine, and she feels guilty about it, and yada yada yada. Yeah. So first dates are a challenge, I'll be honest. But once you get past that awkwardness and you kind of laugh about it a little bit, I found that nothing but positive benefits for my life. It's one of the decisions that I'm most happy with that I've ever made. I'm very proud of myself for it, and I intend to hold it for the rest of my life. And it's something that's is really core to my identity as a person. And I think that's key when it comes to habit building, is that once it becomes part of your identity, it becomes a lot easier to do. When someone offers me a beer at a party, I'm not having to struggle with the willpower to be able to say no, right?
Yeah.
All I'm saying is that Barry doesn't drink, and I'm Barry, and so that doesn't happen.
Yep.
And so once it's part of your identity, it just becomes second nature. And that peer pressure isn't there as much as it was in my childhood years, where there still was that chance. Why isn't Barry drinking? Is he pulling soft, etc., etc.? So yeah, that's my attempt to answer your question, Chad.
Amazing. No, I mean, I think it's a great way of looking at it, and I think it's you've come to the best possible decision. I actually think the rest of us need to change the way we look at alcohol, because it's a drug, and it's it has detrimental effects on the body. So I completely agree there, and I certainly will never be peer pressuring Barry, because I just don't see the need. Would you like to ask me your question?
All right, Chad. So for what's on your mind, Chad, I want to ask if you could go back to one of the destinations you've traveled to over the last couple of years and live there for a year, so live and work for a year, which one would you pick and why?
Wow, interesting.
So to clarify, it's not a holiday destination. You have to live and work there for a year as a local.
Yeah, I would probably pick Barcelona, to be honest. I thoroughly enjoyed Barcelona. So what is nice is, as you say, as a holiday destination, you can travel an hour out and you've got the beach, the real beach. Obviously, in Barcelona, there's a man-made beach, which is there, but obviously for the real, natural stuff, sort of an hour and a half out, you can find decent beaches there. But just in terms of the city, the way the city's built, the people are really nice. I really like the sort of bicycle lanes everywhere, and the city being open to people using like electronic scooters and one wheels and all those types of things. So for me, I just love Barcelona. I love the city. It's absolutely beautiful. Love how one man has touched the city in the most profound way. Antoni Gaudí, with all of his architecture throughout the city, the La Sagrada Familia, Park Güell, the Casas. I think it's a stunning place, and so for me, was the place that I chose to propose to my now fiance. So I could definitely live there for a year. Obviously, I don't speak Spanish, which could be a bit of a challenge. But I've got friends who have moved over there and thoroughly enjoy living there. So I could definitely do that.
That's fascinating. I think it's very high on my list. I've heard such amazing things about Barcelona, and it's one of the few places in Europe that I haven't had the chance to actually go and visit. Yeah. And so I'm dying to go there. So I'm going to take the recommendation and put it at the top of my list.
Amazing. Well, yeah, I think that was quite a nice little insert there. Hopefully you guys enjoyed our questions. Basically we've reached the end of a jam-packed episode. The last episode for 2019. Pretty crazy, actually. But yeah, we'll definitely be back next week. Don't worry. Just because it's New Year's and all of that type of thing, we will be fresh and ready to go, as good as new. Basically, thanks again for tuning in. Happy New Year. I hope you guys have a safe journey, and certainly, just enjoy the moment. Don't set it up too much, because I think a lot of the time people picture New Year's Eve as being one way or another, and it seems to never get to that ultimate level. So just enjoy it for what it is. Be present, thanks Barry, thanks for everything on the podcast, and here's to next year, bud.
Here's to 2020, the decade of possibility, and really looking forward to seeing what we do. So thanks everyone.
Awesome. Well, thanks for tuning in again, and this was episode 7 of Across the Pond.
Across the pond with Barry and Chad.
Christmas around the corner. Actually, when they show this, will be after Christmas, actually.
Should we start again? Let's start again. Sorry,
say again?
I've got some very bad news. Carl's not going to be pleased.
What's up?
That was a different shot. I put the Christmas tree behind the door. Yeah. So to open the door, I had to move it. Open the door, and the angel at the top of the tree fell, and she has been decapitated. Here's her head.
That is brutal. Holy moly.
So Yeah, I'm in trouble.
That's not good at all.
I've even heard of there have been there would be quite a negative. Sorry, let me start that again. And also, very nice to see your flatmate in the background.
Hopefully, you can crop that out. Yeah.
Is to deliver Brexit by the 31st of January. Can I quickly take this call? Sorry, bud. Sorry, I'm just busy on. Thank you so much for phoning. Sorry, bud. The doctor said they could actually see me at 10, but that's chilled. I'll stick to my later appointment.
Cool. It's not innocent. Not in my. It's not innocent. Not in my.
What would have been series before? I can't remember what it's called.
Mr. Robot.
That's the one. Let me start again. I really think he basically. Sorry.
What do you really think, Chad?
But artist of 2019.
Yes. Again, so this is another potentially what's the word? What word am I? Yo, it left me. Okay.
As far as I know, there is. Let me re-record that. That was pretty shocking.
Sorry, I didn't have anything to add there. I don't know what to say.
Oh, it's fine. You're right. No, there was nothing to say there. You've got you can. Did you like our little dancing bit last week?
That was great.